Well, last time we talked about postmodernism. As
I'm sure we ended in the middle of a sentence, didn't we?
Oh,
Or
probably.
It's a bad sentence.
I don't remember it now, though.
We'll let it go. I don't
let it
know.
go.
We were making a distinction between modernism and postmodernism, which is very popular at the moment. Everybody's doing it.
Yeah.
I think the distinction was made about 20 years ago by some smart, not particularly good, but smart literary critics. I can't remember even which particular one did it. But there was some talk about the postmodern age.
Oh, yeah,
it's been around a long time. And what they mean by it is something rather foolish. But you can use the term to describe something true. There has been a change, and like most changes, it's been building up for a long time. That is, you can go back and see antecedents of it. But there has been, in the last 10 years, a rather dramatic change. Modernism, as a cultural period in history, has come to a conclusion, and we haven't yet got a good name for the next one. But it's different, and I think the difference, one of the differences anyway, is this: that the moderns were troubled. The moderns, that's how we got started. I think we talked about Hamlet as being a troubled man. And the moderns were profoundly troubled about absolutely everything. They were troubled about society, and they read Karl Marx, and they were troubled about their psychological makeup, and they read Sigmund Freud and all kinds of others like him. They were troubled about theology, and so they read Kierkegaard or whoever. They were troubled about morality, and they read Dostoevsky or they read Nietzsche. The thing we've noticed in the last 10 years, the last decade of the 20th century, to coin a phrase, is that people seem more and more not to be troubled. And that's a very troubling thing to somebody who has been brought up in the modernist movement.
Yeah, well, the modern world did really begin, and nearly everybody agrees about this, it really did begin in the 15th, 16th century. Some people say it began way back with Duns Scotus and especially William of Ockham.
Well, those were the precursors
in the
again,
philosophical order, and it occurred in the Reformation and the growing new economy and the destruction of the commons and the destruction of peasant life, and the new economy changed everything, and the great banking firms arose, and a new kind of order of wealth arose, and a new kind of politics arose. All of those things happened at the same time. The middle class was created. Really, during the time of Chaucer, it began to be created. You can see the seeds of all of this way back in the 15th and 16th century, and it was a slow process, very very gradual. Shakespeare has not really taken up any of the new ideas, particularly. He hasn't taken up the new science. He may have read Francis Bacon. Who knows? He was a later contemporary of Shakespeare's, and everything that Bacon said was already in the air from the continental scientists. And Machiavelli had already written his book, and I think you can see undoubtedly that Shakespeare has read Machiavelli. There's no question about that, and that's a very unsettling book. Just to take one example, the books of the time.
It's against the whole Catholic tradition.
Yeah. It's
the whole Western tradition, as it's against Plato.
Yeah. And one of the things you can see, it struck me last time I taught Shakespeare. Well, it has. I've been teaching Shakespeare every year for years and years and years, and more and more I'm struck by Shakespeare's hostility to the court. Claudius in Hamlet is a man of the court, and he has murdered his own brother, and in order to get his crown and his wife, he's committed adultery with the king's wife, and that happens all the time in Shakespeare, even in the comedies and in the tragedies. The evil always starts in the court. The deviousness and the lying and the wickedness of the court life is. You can't say. It's very hard when you're dealing with a dramatist to say what a dramatist really approves of and doesn't approve of, because he's a dramatist. He's when he tries to put himself in the role of every character in the book and realize that character as fully as he can. But when you read the works of Shakespeare, you say, well, it's very clear that Shakespeare thought the life of the court had absolutely gone to hell. Because that seems to be the root of all evil. And if you go back to Machiavelli, you say, well, gee, there's a textbook for all of these villains that are trying to obtain political power by evil means. They are concerned only with power and their own personal ambition. They'll stop at nothing to attain their ends. And they are, well, Shakespeare uses the term. I mean, he talks about Machiavels, these crafty, conniving people. And Shakespeare has himself personally detests those people and represents them as unalloyed villains in his books. And that's just to talk about the political life.
That's the political. When you said Shakespeare is, I forget what word now you used, angry or detests, I think you said. Yeah. Shakespeare detests the court. Yeah. Well, I think we might be able to count a number of different aspects of society or components of society. Shakespeare is against them all. Modernism draws its force from the decomposition of Christendom. That's what it does. That is, it's tremendous, powerful, energetic force. As Christendom decays, the modernist reacts against it. Now, the court was one of the foundations of Christendom. That is, in the high and palmy days of Christendom, and we've talked about Charlemagne.
The monarch, the prince.
The prince. It was the foundation of a Christian society was the Christian prince. And Shakespeare sees that's corrupted. It's fallen apart. The princes were not good Christians.
The knighthood, chivalry.
Chaucer's very popular.
His knight now. There are some admirable knights,
but they're troubled men.
They're troubled, but they are not the ones you remember.
Oh, in whole, I was thinking of Hamlet.
No, the whole
of Shakespeare. Yes.
You see some, but mostly what you remember is Falstaff. In
this play, you remember the fops. Pretend to be
these silly fops that are in the play. Hamlet is a young man. I believe a young man, not a middle-aged man, who is being brought up to become a model of knighthood, of chivalry. But something's gone wrong.
He despises it.
It's gone wrong.
He despises it. And his best friend, Horatio, despises
it.
Horatio was a soldier, a good, honest soldier, and he has nothing to do with the court. Whereas the courtiers are Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. They're the two most conspicuous.
And Polonius and Laertes. Laertes is a contemptible young man, really. And Claudius. That's what the court has come to.
And in his other plays, we can go through the characters. The Henry V stands out.
Yeah, he's the model of Christian chivalry. He is the model of Christian chivalry.
And he is held up as somehow, I don't know, Shakespeare got optimistic for a short period in his life, and I think he really did hold him up, Henry V, up as some sort of possibility of the opposite.
Yeah.
But everything else is against.
Of course, he's a figure of the past too. You understand that that's a history play, and it goes back.
Possibly he was being held up, but to whom? To King James. I mean, when you look at the princes of Shakespeare's day, it's hard to defend the monarchy.
Yeah, that's right. No, he looks back to characters, to old, who's the old man that he admires so much? Oh, what's his name? The one that gives the speech, that marvelous speech about England in Richard II.
Gaunt.
Gaunt, John of Gaunt. Now there's the man, John of Gaunt. Now he was a great man, and he was a great
He
man.
was, and as a matter of fact, parenthetically, John of Gaunt was
yeah.
Chaucer's father-in-law.
Yes, exactly.
Literally, Chaucer married John of Gaunt's daughter, and he was a great man. He was the regent of England when Richard II was too young to govern, and he was a great man. Yes, time-honored Lancaster.
Yeah.
Time-honored Lancaster.
Yeah. No, those, but you see, that's in the past, and it's clear in that play, at least Shakespeare.
And Richard, according to Shakespeare anyway, Richard didn't live up to it.
Oh, no.
Was unable to cope.
No,
Not an evil man, but a weak man.
Yeah, a weak man. A man in a lot of ways that Shakespeare admired. Kind of poet, but not a man to rule. And then you get those terrible, abominable villains like Richard III, Hunchback, and then you get people like Macbeth. There's the exceptions are always exceptional.
Yeah.
In this play, it's young Fortinbras. Now, the Hamlet really admires young Fortinbras. But young Fortinbras does not belong to the court. He's a soldier. He's a young, daring
He's outside
soldier.
Denmark. He doesn't belong to Denmark.
Doesn't belong to Denmark. He's out.
It's almost as if Shakespeare was saying he didn't belong to England. That is, that we have to have somebody come from outside the system to cure it. Oh, when you were saying that Shakespeare undoubtedly read Machiavelli, I'm sure that's true. But I think one of the things we do have to say is that Shakespeare probably didn't read very much.
No, I don't think so either. In fact, he maybe didn't even read Machiavelli. He may have simply picked up what everybody knew about.
That's such an astonishing thing to say today, that it's worth recording. It's worth taking seriously. I suppose we've said it before, but sometimes I think that a formal education is an impediment to intellectual and spiritual growth. And that it may be that we would all be better off without it. Now, I know that we live in a world where we can't do without it. Cars would stop, electricity would go off, but those are all really unimportant things, cars and electricity. Our greatest poet, Shakespeare, was a comparatively uneducated man. We know he finished high school.
Yeah,
but that's it.
That's right, and by our standards, he was certainly very good high school.
Oh, he was very good, but very limited.
Yeah,
by our standards. I mean, very deep, very high, but very limited.
Yeah.
No science at all.
Oh, no.
For example, none at all.
No, it was very old-fashioned. In fact, it was
Latin.
A lot of it was Latin, and it was largely a rhetorical education. It was a literary education again, although it was mainly reading the old, the Latin authors that were sort of school pieces. Did Shakespeare read Virgil all the way through?
He read his textbooks.
He read his textbooks, and the textbooks were, alas, as they still are,
the first 6 books.
The first 6 books in which you're largely learning how to parse sentences, where you learn nothing. It's almost I don't know that there are any references to Virgil in Shakespeare. I'm sure there must be.
Must be, but
none come to mind. No famous places come to mind. There's a famous passage that is clearly an allusion to Montaigne. It's one of those passages. It's in King Lear about the bare-forked animal, and about it has to do with it comes from an essay of Montaigne's where he's talking about the discovery of the savages in the New World and that sort of thing. And it's quite clearly an echo of it. But then it doesn't even prove that Shakespeare read it. It was such a commonplace.
No, he might have picked it up from his friends.
Yeah.
Shakespeare was a close friend of Ben Jonson, and Ben Jonson read everything.
Yeah, he was a learned.
And at those conversations at the tavern, Shakespeare was very quick to pick up all kinds of stuff. But I think it is a wonderful thing to propose to ourselves here and now that really we have made a fetish out of education. We really have.
Yeah, well, and of course it is a particular kind of education. It is a bookish education where we are more interested in learning the book than we are learning what the book is talking about. It's more important for us to know the theories of Machiavelli than to know the reality that Machiavelli is talking about. The book itself has come to constitute education for it. One of my favorite examples is just in the way we use the word history. When we use the word history, we're talking about written accounts of what happened. But that isn't history. History is what happened, not the books written about it. We find out about what happened through the books, but they're a means to an end.
Machiavelli isn't the court.
No, he isn't the court. He's a man writing about, he's giving his theories about the court. He's a new man. If you ever met a new man, oh, what a new man.
You know, I don't want to go this far because that would be an exaggeration perhaps in the other direction, but Shakespeare is streetwise. There's something about him, of the kid who was brought up in the streets. Now, how old was he when he came to London? I think he might very well have been 16. It's been counted, I'm sure. Although we know very little about him.
Yeah, really.
It's probably disputed whether it was 16 or 17. But
he was just a boy.
He was a boy.
He was.
And he left the small town of Stratford where he had been, we know he'd been to school. But, some of his biographers say that he might have even been an assistant schoolmaster for another year or something. And so he, being the brightest boy, and when he was 16, they made him a teacher because they never had enough money to pay their teachers. So maybe he hung on another year. Maybe he was 17 when he came up to London. But he was a very young fellow, and he didn't come up to, he didn't go up to Oxford. He didn't go up to upper suburbia. He got mixed up with the theater. And again, it doesn't pay to go into all kinds of details about this, but the theater was on the other side of the Thames River. It was something like today running away with a circus. They were pretty rough people. The theaters were places where people were murdered. They drank. There were prostitutes. Queen Elizabeth didn't attend the theater. The theater came to her and entertained at the court every once in a while. But the theater was a pretty rough place.
Well, Marlowe,
seamy side of life. Christopher, he did murder somebody.
He was involved in crime.
Yeah.
He was murdered himself in a bar, as I remember.
Well, again, I've forgotten. Was he murdered? He murdered.
Oh, he was.
He
murdered.
had a terrible reputation.
He was murdered. He had a terrible reputation. He was a playwright primarily,
and Ben Jonson did too.
Oh, Ben Jonson got thrown in jail. He was in a duel, and it was in wartime. It wasn't civil, but he was.
But he was a tough guy.
A very tough guy. Yeah. They were. It was a very rough kind of life. And
I think you learned a lot about everything by being in that being in the theater.
Yeah, no, the theater was definitely
and
not.
We're a bunch of ninnies. That is, we university people. The typical university person goes to a nice high school and he graduates with good grades, and he goes to a nice college and he graduates with good grades and he becomes a teacher. And there is no corruption. There's no contamination with that terrible everyday reality. Shakespeare's plays just reek of everyday reality.
No, we don't see the seamy, as they used to say, the seamy side of life at all. Well brought up children don't see it at all, and they suffer terribly from it. They yearn for it, in fact.
Yes, they do.
That has a lot to do, I think, with why they take up drugs and the kind of music that attracts them, and so they yearn for some knowledge of reality, because the stuff that they've been involved in, they've been in school all their life, and there is no reality there at all. They've been reading books about books about books. They don't even read Hamlet. They read books about Hamlet, they read summaries of Hamlet and synopses of Hamlet, but even this play they don't see. And then when they do see it, they say, well, it's all about those old people who lived back there, a long time ago. It has nothing to do with you at all. So that reality is such a long way from them, but to Hamlet, to Shakespeare, reality.
I mean, this particular text I've got here, I've got the Yale text and you have the Harvard text.
I have this is Kittredge.
Kittredge, yeah, he's Harvard.
Yeah. Park. Yeah, that's right.
And this is Tucker, Tucker Brook. And, you look at these things, and right away, it says here, the Yale Shakespeare. You stop and say, oh, come on. And then they have a photograph of the original page, and, and it's all antiquarianism. It's all, this is what it was like. And then there are notes in the back that explain all the jokes.
Notes.
And, the rowdy thing, I say it's more like a circus, but gosh, I don't know whether most people who will listen to our tapes have ever been to a circus either. That is, the circus has been destroyed. It's now a production. In the United States, the most famous circus is the Barnum and Bailey Circus, which is about as far from Barnum and Bailey as you can get. For example, they've dumped the freaks.
Oh yeah.
Long
Can't have
since.
freaks.
And they're thinking of dumping the tigers, I think, because the environmentalists don't like the idea. I mean, they wonder, what are they going to be left with? I went to the circus last year. The Barnum and Bailey Circus came to town here, and it was very much like a Broadway musical. That's what it was like.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of singing and a lot of chorus girls and a lot of lights playing around, and very little of what I would call a circus. They still had a couple of aerialists left. They still had some of the, as it were, quotations from the old circus. But do you remember, I'm sure you do, what a circus used to be like? I mean, it was you were a little afraid to go to the circus. That is, there were people there that they told you that, well, they kidnapped boys.
Yeah.
I mean, we were warned to be careful.
You saw those guys. You saw those barkers out there, and you knew as a little kid. You knew this was a dangerous place. It had the smell of something really low.
It was,
and it was. Mr. Nellick, I worked in the circus for years. It had a profound effect on his character. That is, a lot of people, thought that Mr. Nellick, they were shocked by him. They thought that he had a sort of rather harsh view of the world. Well, of course, he ran around with. I think it was a carnival. That's what it was. It was a carnival
even more
for some years as a young fellow, And my gosh, you find out about the real world pretty fast.
First thing I'm sure you have to learn is how to take care of yourself, because they'll eat you. They'll kill you. And the next thing is, of course, how to trick everybody. That is, the rubes out there. They're the enemy, and everything you do to try to cheat them. Shakespeare, as a little boy, 16 or 17, ran off, as it were, to the carnival. That's what he did. Except that in those days, the carnivals were at the height of their greatness, and they were known as the theater. And they produced the highest art that English literature, anybody, has ever known. Today, the circuses and the carnivals have fallen off. If you can find one, hold on to it, because it's still pretty good. I mean, there's still more real drama in an honest tightrope walker than there is in Broadway plays.
Yeah.
They're sophisticated. I don't know who's afraid of Virginia Woolf or whatever. That's pretty.
No, we have a theater that's completely decadent.
It's decadent, and it's not real. No. But a tightrope walker or a lousy juggler, as Chaucer,
or a lion tamer,
those are real people. They're out there with real lions, and they get killed. It's something, at least, to see. But it's almost gone. I mean, it's the last shreds of what used to be something. I don't know, I always get involved in parentheses here, but one of the things, I don't know what triggered this, but one of the things we have to face in Shakespeare is that whatever Shakespeare is, he's not what we would today call an intellectual. He was a real man who was brought up in a school of hard knocks, and he knows what he's talking about. How he knew everything he knew, we don't. It's a miracle.
He spent most of his time traveling with the company and acting himself.
Yeah, well, they lived in a tent, just like a carnival.
They lived in a tent. He was out on the road, and when he found time to write these plays, we have no idea. He wasn't a man who lived in a library, or who had a library. Shakespeare had probably no library at all. He had no books.
No books.
No books.
Not even a dictionary.
Yeah. Now we know that. Now I think certainly he did read Plutarch's Lives, North's Plutarch's Lives. There's no question about that.
But you know, that was a popular paper.
That was a popular book. That's right. It was the kind of book you went out and bought for a shilling.
He thumbed that to death.
For sixpence. You bought Plutarch's Lives.
He only read it. He stole from it. He lifted the whole page.
Well, or all of the poems.
He had a couple of things like that.
There is an original book called I think it's called the hero is called Hamlet, and I've read it. I read it in graduate school, and it gives you the plot of Hamlet.
He stole somebody else's play.
Same thing, and he read that, no doubt. But that was a like a dime novel in our time.
That's what he read. He read
That's what he really read.
Yeah.
And the highest thing would be Plutarch's Lives, and there were the famous victories of Henry V, you know.
All popular
stuff, historical stuff that was put out for the public to read.
In a way, you know, you try to find contemporary equivalents for this, and I'm afraid they don't exist. When we say dime novels, there are no dime novels. We live in an age where everything has been industrialized. I was in the bookstore downtown here yesterday. That is the cheap, popular bookstore. I was looking up and down the shelves of these paperback books, and one of the things that struck me is that the stuff is no good either. That is, that cheap literature has been destroyed. That is, there aren't any dime novels, penny dreadfuls, wild and crazy romantic stories of the kind that people used to read. They're all done by machines. That is, these paperback books are turned out by the billions, and there's a mechanical and faceless quality to them. There used to be a low, lurid, popular literature. It dealt with murder and, well, in the United States, it was all over by the time of my childhood, but I'm sure that, say, my father read, when he was a boy, lurid tales of the Wild West, which purported to be true. The life of Wild Bill Hickok, or the life of Billy the Kid.
Yeah.
And they were exciting books. You know, they were half lies and half true, but they had about them a certain, what I'm trying to get at is a certain earthy realism to them. And their parents would always say, "Now don't read those terrible books.
Read that trash."
Read that trash. But I'm afraid, like everything else, gosh, I really am pessimistic. You can't even get a hold of any trash anymore. That is, we have manufactured trash. We have stuff that is written by the school teachers, in a way, for the purpose of filling the trash market. Gosh, when I was a kid, there used to be, for 10 cents, you could go down to the corner candy store. They were corrupt places. They were, again, our parents would say, "Now don't you hang around that candy store. That's a bad place," because Gus the Greek, who ran that candy store, undoubtedly made book. He was a bookie.
Well, you could gamble there.
You could gamble there.
They used to have little punch boards. You had to pay a penny, and you take a chance. You
illegal.
Started gambling. It's illegal. Yeah.
I mean, those guys were on the edge of some kind of underworld, but they had. On the newsstands, for 10 cents, you could buy something called the Wild West Weekly. In the trade, they called them pulp magazines. They were remarkably good. In fact, if I had a graduate student, isn't that awful? I might get him onto that. You know, that would be a good project. That is, what was that magazine really like? I suppose it's been done. I don't know. There was an organization called Street and Smiths, and they published detective stories, cowboy stories, adventure stories. They had cop stories, sea stories. They had everything. War stories. It was a publisher, and they paid a penny a word to their authors, and their authors worked their tails off. You imagine that the average length of a story may have been what, I don't know, 30,000 words would be a long story. They didn't make very much money. Some very interesting authors came out of that. Upton Sinclair, for example, became very famous American writer, got his start working for Street and Smiths.
Edgar Rice Burroughs, who never became any kind of distinguished author, but he started there. He could write. He could tell a story.
Tarzan
books
came out of that.
Came out of that, which are pretty good, really pretty good. They're still very readable, but they could tell a story. All those people were great storytellers. They could tell a yarn.
They really could. Now that's the kind of literature that Shakespeare read.
Yeah.
That's hard for us to believe, but Shakespeare is closer to Tarzan than he is to T.S. Eliot. That's for sure.
Yeah. Oh yes. And that's often the problem with reading Shakespeare is that people they oversubtleize the story. They make it more complicated than it is. Heaven knows Hamlet is a complicated character, but he's not as complicated as the Freudian interpreters make him out to be.
Complicated but not sophisticated. Yeah. There's a difference.
Yeah.
I mean, your character in your carnival, your Barker, is a complicated man.
Yeah.
He knows evil and he knows good, and he's been corrupted by evil, and he's a devious person. But he's not sophisticated.
Yeah.
I guess what we're really saying is simply that he's not bookish.
No, that's right.
What we do today is we identify learning with book learning. We don't think there's any other kind. Book learning and laboratory learning, that is science and letters, for us the whole of education. And there's a whole world out there of people who are very close to being illiterate. And the amazing thing about Shakespeare is that if he's illiterate, and I think in a way he was, that is, he's unlettered, he's not literate in our sense of the word. He couldn't get a job as an editor for a modern publishing house. He couldn't get a job at a modern university. Absolutely not. He's not well enough educated. And yet, look what he knew. And he knew it because don't misunderstand me. He didn't know it because he was a genius. I think that's another mistake. Sometimes people say, oh, yes, but he was a genius. As if there was some kind of almost supernatural power that he had. I don't think that's it either. I know Shakespeare's audiences were up to him. That is, they sat and listened to these plays, or stood and listened to these plays, and they understood every word.
Yeah, the audiences for Shakespeare were a great mixture of people. There might be a few noblemen out there.
They came across in disguise sometimes.
But by and large, they were the rabble who were out there.
And
it only cost a few pennies to go to the play, and they were out there standing in the pit. If they couldn't afford a seat, they'd stand in the pit. And they made a lot of noise, and a lot of jokes have been made about it. They had no education whatever, who certainly were illiterate in the sense that they couldn't read or write at all.
But they were brought up in the same school Shakespeare was.
Yeah.
They were brought up in the school of reality.
Yeah.
So they knew what he was talking about.
Yeah, that's hard for us to understand.
It is.
It's even hard for us to believe. You talk about classes, right? Our classes are much more rigid than Shakespeare's ever were. That is, our
social distinctions?
Social distinctions, yeah, and distinctions that are the result of education. Just because you've got a college degree, that qualifies you somehow to understand
I suppose what we're saying is that it disqualifies.
It does.
And so, I mean, what we do, and it's, in a sense what we're doing now, is we're trying to undo a terrible mess. I mixed my metaphor. We're trying to clean up a terrible mess. We've all been educated to the point where we really cannot understand this play. Education is an impediment. Imagine that. There have been, this is a shocking thing to say, and I suppose when you say it, nobody believes you. They think, oh, well, he doesn't really mean it. It's just a way of getting attention or something. But let's put it on the table. That is education, book education. What we mean today by education is an impediment to knowledge. Well, there have been some very serious people who said that. You know who believed that? For example, Rudyard Kipling believed that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember his novel, Kim?
Oh, yes, that's right.
It's not a great novel. It's not in a class with Shakespeare, but it's very good.
Oh, yes.
Very good. And I think the whole point of that book is that Kim, the young half Indian, half English boy, grows up on the street.
He knows India the way we know our own living room, or should know our own living room. He knows it. He knows the languages. He knows the kinds of people that are out there. He knows how to live in that society, how to scrape by. He thrives in that kind of life, and he's never read a book in his life.
He astonishes the school people when he finally does go to school.
Yeah.
Kipling does have to pay service. He does have to do duty to the English system, and so I think at the end of the book he goes off to school.
He does. That's the great struggle, is whether he will become an Indian really or an Englishman.
Yes.
Well, he has.
But his genius, to use the word in another sense, that is his spirit, is right off the street. I mean, he knows the gutter. He knows good and evil in the lowest, the dregs of Indian society. Again, he sleeps in ditches. He gets attached to traveling.
An old holy man.
Yeah.
He follows this old holy man all over. Doesn't understand him at all. When he starts off, he gradually gets so he does understand him, but he attaches himself to this holy man.
And you said a moment ago that college students in the last generation took up the drugs for this reason. Wasn't that really the attraction of on the road? And they dressed like bums and they wanted to be hobos. We're talking about middle-class American students, and I'm sure the same thing happened in Europe. They had a yearning for that kind of reality.
Yeah, they wanted that harsh side of life. They really felt they had been lied to, and they had.
They had.
Right. They had been lied to by their teachers and by their parents and by their ministers and priests. They had lived up. They'd grown up in a glass house, protected from everything, and they knew there was something out there they didn't know about, but they didn't have any experience of it except a literary experience of it, or they got it through TV. It was all mediated experience, second-hand experience. They wanted first-hand experience. And alas, it's very hard to get first-hand experience.
It's almost impossible, because what happened to those poor kids is they ran into a conspiracy, a dangerous word, put it in quotes. They ran into another aspect of the industry. What happened is there were some very knowledgeable people out there who took them in and sold them another ticket to another piece of unreality.
Yeah, they made them into an industry.
Professional into an industry.
They became the Beats generation,
became the Beats.
or they
were
wanted,
syndicated overnight.
Yeah, they found a title for them. They found a music for them. They found a costuming for them. So that pretty soon everybody got into the clothing business.
And they were politicized.
That's right.
They
Political
spouted
people.
a line, and the poor kids never found the reality they were seeking. They fell from one unreality into a worse unreality, and they had a choice between a phony lower class and a phony middle class. And how can you break through? Well, I don't know. But I do know one. Well, I do know. One way is to read Hamlet. That is to unhook yourself from all your education and just read this play. This play is real. This play is not phony. Right? From the word go. Who's there? Oh, Hamlet's thing has been over-intellectualized by the professors. Whatever you do, don't read a book about Hamlet.
Well, don't read the notes. In my book, and they're, as notes go, they're probably the best.
Yes.
Kittredge, they're the best notes. I just measured them. The text of this play runs 130 pages. It's one of Shakespeare's longest plays. 130 pages, and the notes run twice that length, exactly twice. So you have a book that's 1/3 text and 2/3 notes. That's about par for the course.
This one isn't quite that bad, but it tries to compete with
Well,
it.
Kittredge is long-winded.
Yeah, well, he's smarter too.
Smarter, and
but this guy
more entertaining too.
Yeah. This guy is a meaner man, but that's what he tries to do. And I must say, I read through most of these notes and I don't really give a damn. I really don't want to know all this, for the most part. Or once in a while, there's something that you would have missed.
Well, there are words you don't understand, for example.
But you skip them. I mean, the words you don't understand are not enough to stop you. And if you misunderstand them and misread them, I know this. and it says platform, colon, level space on castle ramparts. Well, come on. I mean, are we all so dumb that we couldn't have figured that out for ourselves? Platform of the castle. What? In the first place, I don't care. It isn't all that important. But that insults my imagination. Not my intelligence, my imagination.
Well,
I didn't have to be told that.
Yeah, especially your imagination, because what you do when you read the play, of course, it is very important that you imagine what's going on. And I'm afraid that that's one of the hardest things for us to do, is to imagine what's going on. When you read this scene, you don't have to know anything particularly. You don't have to have any background knowledge.
You have to be there.
The architecture of castles. You have to imagine yourself as there. You have to realize, of course, that a person going to the play, it doesn't have all that stage explanation.
No,
it doesn't say Elsinore. You don't know where it is. Platform before the castle line says, enter 2 sentinels. First, Francisco, who paces up and down at his post, then Bernardo, who approaches him. Now, you understand the person watching the play doesn't get any of that.
Read that.
They see it, of course. There is something there on the stage, although in Shakespeare's time, you understand, there would have been nothing there. There's a bare stage. Our tape stopped on us, and we're going to carry on. We have to go back.
Due to technical difficulties
beyond our control. What I was saying is that this is a bare stage, and for that matter, there's no lighting effect either. In this case, the audience is sitting there in probably the daytime, and they don't know it's night on the stage. There are no lighting effects. But it has to be given by the dialogue, you see. The dialogue gives you the time of day.
It is now struck 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
Get thee to bed.
Yeah. So now, I see. Well, now I see. It's dark because they don't recognize one another. Otherwise, he'd say, "Hi, Bernardo. Hi, Francisco." No, he's relieving the guard right at 12 o'clock, and Francisco is very relieved. I mean, he's literally. He says, "For this relief, much thank." That's almost a play. There's a play on words. For this relief.
That is, you relieve the guard.
Yeah.
But then he's relieved for his trouble, his anxiety.
Yeah.
For this relief, much thanks. 'Tis bitter cold, and I am sick at heart. And that was a line that the tape didn't like, and it stopped on us. Because how old is the phrase, I am sick at heart? Or how old is the phrase, it is bitter cold?
Yeah.
I don't suppose Shakespeare made that up.
I doubt it very
But,
much.
it is poetry. That is, bitterness is a taste. Something is sweet or bitter or sharp or whatever. But bitter comes from taste, and cold is not something you taste, but something that you feel. So it is a classic example, you could put it in a textbook, of a metaphor. That is, bitter cold means, and you could untangle the whole thing, say, as bitterness is to the taste, so cold is to the touch. Yeah? But what a marvelous metaphor that is. So much so that it's become a part of the English language.
Yeah, and one of the things that I always like to say about Shakespeare is that he's full of commonplaces.
It's so obvious.
They don't strike you as being commonplaces. That is, this is all very much kind of ordinary business that's going on here. Although there is that little joke, that little mix-up, and you can see right away there's some worry, there's a tension, there's a trouble in the air, and then he says, "'Tis bitter cold, and I am sick at heart." Again, sick at heart. I don't believe Shakespeare made that up. It's another metaphor.
It's as old as the hills.
Yeah.
And how good it is.
Yeah, it is marvelous. But it's exactly the sort of thing that Francisco would say. He's not a
learned man.
He's not a courtier. He's a soldier. He's a soldier. And he expresses things in a plain way, but still a poetic way when he has something to say.
Well, we might stop right there and say that one of our troubles when we read, one of our difficulties when we read this play is that it may be that we have never been bitter cold. We've often put that up to our students. That is, in all honesty, and look back in your life, have you ever been bitter cold. And usually, if you, in our little discussion sessions, as we used to call them, there a few students would sit around a table, or sometimes we got up to 10 or 15 of them, and we did have a little classroom, but where the students could talk with us. We didn't just lecture as we are now, but students would talk. A student would say, "Oh yes, I've been cold. I was on a ski trip," and you laugh. And you say, "Well, you know, when you're on a ski trip, you're not bitter cold. You're cold. I mean, we wouldn't deny that you're cold, but that's not the same thing because, well, help is near. I mean, you're under somebody's protection. To be bitter cold is to be hopelessly cold. There isn't any help for it."
Yeah, well, the bitterness, you see, we use the word bitter to also refer to our own feelings. When we feel bitter about something, there's a kind of sourness that's inside us, that a kind of hopelessness. You know, people who are bitter.
Maybe young people can't be bitter.
Yeah, that's the problem. They're not. They haven't lived long enough. They haven't lived long enough to get bitter about anything. Yeah. But my son-in-law is always kidding his wife. He says, she'll make some critical remark. She says, "Now you're being bitter. Don't be bitter." He'll say, "Well, she's not a bit." He knows that's a joke. She's not bitter at all. That's just a little discomfort of some sort. But
to be bitter is
it's a terrible thing. Terrible thing.